Good, af Good afternoon. My name is Zbigniew Pisarski. I'm president of the Kazimir Pulaski Foundation. And please, my dear panelists, join me on the stage. I have with me a great lineup of very diversified but very prominent and representative panelists. Starting from my right, Peter de Roover, President of House of Representatives from Belgium. Great to have you, sir. Marko Duric, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Serbia. Great to have you, sir. Maggie Fino, Deputy Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs from Albania. Great to have you. And we have also Arman Yegoyan, Chairman of the Standing Committee on European Integration at the National Assembly of Armenia, and Kaspar Veldkamp, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Netherlands and future EU ambassador to China. So we are gathering at the Yerevan Dialogue, and I must say that I have a very personal attachment to the conference. I was here each time from the beginning. Is the third edition, and first time when I was here, and I was very open to learn, to understand Armenia. And I've heard about Euro-Atlantic shift of Armenia, and I came here and I've seen a lot of experts from India and a lot of representatives of EU from Hungary and Slovakia, including Prime Minister Fico, Minister Sciarto. And after very genuine discussions with Armenian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and colleagues here, I tried to convince them that to Brussels is shorter through Warsaw than through New Delhi. And I must say that I'm really impressed how Armenia is learning and doing at the same time how to commit to Euro-Atlantic integration. Even the fact that just yesterday we had the EPC gathering here, we had 30 European leaders in Armenia. It's a proof how fast this nation is adapting, learning to what? To get closer to the European Union. I come from Poland. In the beginning of 90s, what we are talking about? In the beginning of 90s, Poland was a bit poorer than Ukraine. Right now, we are at least 5 times wealthier than Ukraine, and certainly safer. So this is what I would like to talk today. And so we'll discuss about EU enlargement, EU integration, and what are the costs of it, and is this a difficult process, and how to get to it. So let me start maybe with a question to colleague from Serbia. If I could start with Minister, well, Marko, you describe Serbia's refusal to align with EU foreign policy as a political maturity. And isn't it this autonomy just a polite way of saying that Serbia wants economic gains from EU integration, but prefers to keep its geopolitical flexibility, ambiguity? And do you think that this is fair towards European Union and other candidate countries?
Thank you for the warm welcome. I am really happy that I'm here in beautiful Yerevan, and I really commend
I think you have to speak a bit louder.
Our wonderful hosts from Armenia, from the Yerevan Dialogue. For me, it's a privilege. It's my first time in Yerevan. I'm also convinced that there are times in politics when action is required urgently. And I'm very happy that this particular meeting of the European political community is happening in Yerevan now. In politics, everything is about timing, and when we analyze my country's foreign policy posture, I can tell you that we are fully aware of unprecedented circumstances with which the world is faced at the moment. We are faced with, and I'm speaking about the big picture because the big picture is important. I will come to the answer right away. So we are faced with the ascent of social media, which is the equivalent of the invention of the printing press. And we all know how the printing machine led to tremendous change and, frankly speaking, in its era also to disruption, to many good things as well. The ascent of AI, which is the equivalent of the basically industrial revolution plus. And definitely with all the benefits, it also brings a degree of disruption. We're also faced with a complete makeover and change of global geopolitical order. So what was unthinkable 5 or 10 years ago is no longer something inconceivable now. So I very much liked one word that you used in your introduction, and that is adaptability. Nations that want to succeed, like we are seeing here in Armenia, like we are seeing also, frankly speaking, in my country, which was able to almost triple the size of its GDP in less than a decade. The key word is adaptability, pursuing national interest while at the same time sticking to some principles of international public law. So speaking about Serbia's relationship with the EU, Serbia has contributed more to the security of Europe than many other countries in the region that are nominally 100% aligned on one hand. On the other hand,
and if you could give examples of this security support to you.
Well, I will give you one very concrete and tangible example. Serbia has aligned itself on all key elements of European foreign policy in practice when it comes to Ukraine, for example, by sending humanitarian aid on an unprecedented scale. We've sent more than 90% of humanitarian aid to the people of Ukraine in the past couple of years from our region. And I'm not saying this to diminish the efforts of other countries, they are relevant, but we've done our fair share. At the same time, we are pursuing our own national interest. We believe that it is in the interest of Serbia to remain one of the meeting places, one of the places where people can talk and try to resolve open issues through dialogue. And now I believe that dialogue and finding a way forward is in the interest of both sides involved in this terrible conflict. At the same time, we have a unique position. We are trying to protect our own national interests. As you know, Serbia's territorial integrity has been compromised by unilateral secession of Kosovo, or as we say, illegal unilateral secession of Kosovo in 2008. And both Ukraine and the Russian Federation support Serbia's view on the status of Kosovo, as well as 5 EU member states. So I don't see why Serbia's territorial integrity would be less important than the territorial integrity of any other European nation. And frankly speaking, it's not something that the people of Serbia can understand either. But on all other segments and elements, and on the substance of things, I think Serbia is, with its economy, with its foreign policy posture and an unprecedented network of friendships and alliances and partnerships, a true asset for Europe in our region.
Gestures are very important, and thank you for this support for Ukraine. I fully appreciate it. And will you send representatives to Moscow for the anniversary of the 9th of May?
Serbia takes a lot of pride today in our contribution to the anti-fascist struggle during the Second World War. And we also value the contribution of the Red Army to the liberation of Belgrade. So this is not something that we are embarrassed of or that we are hiding. We are aware that in this liberation, troops from Russia, from Ukraine, from Belarus, from all other former Soviet republics took part. But I also must say that 800,000 people from Yugoslavia, mainly from Serbia, took part in this liberation. So we celebrate in Belgrade together with all of them. And yes, we do send representatives to various places in which basically people commemorate the anniversaries. So a couple of years ago, our president was on that parade together with, for example, the Israeli Prime Minister and some other EU leaders. I'm sure that we will be always adequately represented at all relevant places where victory against fascism is commemorated, because those people who believe that such evils cannot repeat themselves in a very malign form in the 21st century have not learned much from history. Unfortunately, technology advances, but human nature and human societies tend to stay the same. We stick to principles. For us, the territorial integrity of every country, for example, of Serbia, of Ukraine, or other countries, is equally valuable. You see, we don't have this view that one country's territorial integrity is less valuable than other countries.
Thank you for that, and I hope that Serbian representatives will remind about it to Russian hosts in Moscow. And let me move to the heart of Europe, to Belgium, the country which is hosting the capital of European integration project, the country that is, however, also quite regularly on the media as a symbol of divisions, regionalism, some nationalism. And do you think that you can enlarge EU and absorb successfully new member states at the same time to keep cohesion of European integration product? And maybe you have some recommendations based on Belgian struggles about cohesion.
I think you make a very good point, because integration asks for some shared values, and I think that the enlargement of the European Union has more explicit than in the past a geopolitical aspect. But then again, you can't enlarge with countries that are completely against or don't are ruled by the principles that are basically for the European Union. It is for that reason that some countries want to be part of the European Union. You mentioned your own country, for instance. I think that's a good example how the integration can improve the political and the social life, but also the economical growth of a country. And Poland is a very successful example in it. So you have to look for a balance, and maybe because of course we have the idea of that we can only take major steps if all the member states can agree on. In our government, at least, we're trying to look at possibilities, let's say, to do things maybe with a smaller group that can work together on certain issues where it is impossible to find a compromise with all the member states. But nevertheless, we must try to avoid that this is the start of disintegration, which could be the case. Then you have certain member states that go very fast and others that remain more prudent. So it is, I don't think you can put it in one formula. It will be ever continuing struggle and finding a balance between the two elements. So a larger European Union should be created on the principles of the Copenhagen criteria. You can't say, okay, whatever country, you can be part of our growing European Union. So we must stick to those principles. But let us not forget that there is more and more strategic element in the discussions about enlargement.
Peter, your words are honey to my heart about the values, reminding that we cherish the same values in the EU and we want to defend them. But looking at the, sorry for being a bit maybe blunt, we call it Warsaw Rule. There is a Chatham House rule for lack of attribution, and Warsaw Rule is for straightforwardness. We have war behind the border. We don't have a time for political correctness, and sometimes we have to cut to the chase. Belgium is one of the countries that is blocking transfer of frozen Russian assets to Ukraine. You think this is based on values or some very pragmatic calculations, and do you think this is fair towards other EU countries that heavily contribute their own financial and military resources to help Ukraine survive?
We did it on very solid grounds. And I think
they are always very solid, but
I think our Prime Minister, who was rather alone in that stance, was able to convince the partners that it was a very, how do you call it in English, a bad good idea, because you had some risks that you would open to, and then our principal position was, if you want to take that risk.
But these are the risks of the rich. These are the risks of the rich societies, and we have the risk of we share the values.
The risk of
they are dying.
The risk of being after you do what they. It's not an amount of money you can just use without taking a risk. And then we said, okay, let's take that risk, but you are together with us in solidarity to take that risk. And then you saw that they said, there are no risks, but even then we won't be on your side if that would be the case. So we put the question on the table, and then we saw that everyone really saw that there would be and could be a moment that we would spend money that afterwards we had to find somewhere else. So I think there are other, and our government thought that there were other possibilities to help Ukraine, and I think it was a very brave, because it's not very easy to be alone on the political table in Europe, but
I would say brave it would be to transfer the money. Not to transfer is
yeah, but was for instance brave. Poland, were they there if the risks were
but still probably it's easier to pay with the money than with health and life of our children, defending hard security of the country.
For that reason, the question was not, are we going to help? The question was, with which money are we going to do that? And I think the solution that has been found is a better and a more solid solution than the idea that there was free money that you could spend without any risk or without any consequence.
I hope you will advocate for this push also to your government, and I know that you've been advocating for the right causes also in Caucasus, and I think that Ukrainian defenders would be very grateful, and all of us and our security would be impacted by that. But this is maybe more my personal perspective. But let's move to the lawyer that we have in our panel, to our representative from Albania, Megi. Well, Albania is actually a shining example how you can you are kind of like a diligent student. I mean, doing the right thing at the right time, even sometimes ahead of time on the path to European integration. And this is really probably inspiring for many countries, and probably could be a role model for Armenia how to do the process right on time and move forward. However, at the same time, we have difficult discussions for countries maybe like yours about fast-tracking some other countries that are at war. And I'm referring to Ukraine right now. And so Ukraine has been suggested by German and French colleagues that maybe a fast track on EU integration would be a solution to help provide security to Ukraine. How do you see it from your perspective when you are doing the solid, organic work towards European integration? Your neighbors like Northern Macedonia are waiting for more than 10 years in the waiting room. And then there is a discussion about fast-tracking other countries. And to make it clear, I'm very pro-Ukrainian in the struggle for European integration. However, myself, I'm against fast-tracking because I think it might create Euroscepticism in different countries. But what is the perspective of Albania on it?
Thank you very much. I know you introduced me as a lawyer to get a straight answer and not a diplomatic one, but I'm no longer a practicing lawyer, unfortunately. But thank you so much. First of all, I wanted to thank the hosts and the organizers as well. It's also my first time in Yerevan, and it's amazing to be here and also to be alongside such distinguished panelists. And on a topic which goes right at the heart of Europe's future, not only Belgium, but also enlargement, right? And when we talk about enlargement, of course, we talk about Ukraine, Moldova, the Western Balkans, Armenia. And I think I'll start by saying something that we've heard also from the opening remarks, and we keep hearing that, of course, in the last few years, the international security landscape has shifted a lot. And that has really changed the situation in Europe. Russia's aggression against Ukraine as well has brought a different perspective, perhaps also to what you mentioned, maybe a fast track, but I wouldn't call it that necessarily. I think that enlargement is just plainly no longer a policy, just a policy anymore. It's much more than that. It's a strategic investment, it's a strategic necessity, and it's something that we have been, for Albania, we have been echoing this for many years now, since the Thessaloniki Promise in 2003, but also beyond that, integration and enlargement is also about, not just for the candidate countries, but it's also about strengthening Europe's resilience, stability, security, and this is what we've been discussing here in this forum, but also much more than that. So when we talk about enlargement, it's not really a new story. It's something that has been happening for decades. Enlargement as the European Union's most powerful strategic instrument. I mean, we saw that also with the 2004 Big Bang moment. So similarly, we come that, history repeats itself in a way, and today it's no exception that the history of Europe is a history of enlargement. For Albania, we have been clear that, of course, there is the sharing of values. Of course, there is a sharing of and aligning with the EU's policy, but it's also a two-way street in the sense that it's also a merit-based process. So we have maintaining our reforms, maintaining to do the work. We have very comprehensive judicial reform that we have been undertaking for the last few years, but not only that. I mean, we have seen that starting from the opening of the accession negotiations in 2022 with a new methodology, going through the screening process and then opening all clusters within a year. So it takes a lot of work and consistent work. And if that wasn't the case, then if we had already achieved everything, we'd already be part of it. But of course, and we're talking about, and not just to mention the 100% CFSP alignment, but also as an exporter now of security, and not just as an importer. When I say 100% CFSP alignment, I also mean exporting on in terms of and contributing to EU missions. I also mean being, and just recently we had the second session of the Albania EU Security and Defense dialogue as well. But of course, we talk about concrete results when it comes to also the Reform and Growth Facility, where Albania is among the top performers in the region. So I think it's a combination of both, for sure, that you need to do the work on the ground, but the geopolitics behind it plays a very big and important role. And I think that's the case for not just the candidate countries, but also for the European continent. We are very supportive for any country who shares the same values, who is willing to do the work, to be a member state. And I think Albania has also shown in terms of its foreign policy of being a catalyst for regional cooperation as well, that we are all for regional cooperation, especially in the framework of EU integration. So I think this goes the same for Ukraine and the candidate countries, because we don't just aspire to be members of the EU, but we're already acting as part of it. And I think that's the most important thing, to really act as an EU member state. Of course, being part of the EU, and when we talk about enlargement, we cannot dismiss the diversity aspect of it. But I think that's the most important thing, of coming together on what unites us, on the challenges that we face, on what we share, to really get around also the diversities of the process. And in that case also it's also a two-way street when we talk about enlargement. Of course, the work that the candidate countries do, but also what the EU provides. And the EU needs to, when we talk about the EU working on itself in a parallel manner, to be ready to join, to have other and new member states joining, member states that can really contribute to its security and resilience.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I was thinking about asking you a question about your decision to join Board of Peace, but I decided to maybe leave it for another panel discussions. But congratulations on the membership. However, let me jump to Kaspar. Kaspar, you are very experienced European diplomat. Now you will represent the whole European Union to China, which is itself a subject and also impacts the regions of both Western Balkans, but also Ukraine and Europe as a whole. But I want to make a reference to the statement by President Macron from yesterday, when he underlined that he feels obliged to remind that there are 4,000 Russian troops in Armenia, including 1,000 border guarding Armenian border, in fact at the cost of Armenian state. And do you think that European Union making this big show off in Yerevan, coming here at scale and making a lot of promises, and there was one promise by chief diplomat Kaja Kallas about opening EU mission on foreign interference. I think the interference was probably related between, among others, China and Russia. Do you think that EU can provide security to Armenia?
I think that, thank you, Zbigniew. At least it's very important to see that Armenia is on our mental map, and very clearly now. And the EPC summit taking place for the first time in the Southern Caucasus and here in Armenia,
a bit closer to the microphone, please.
Showing that Armenia is also on the move is very important. Armenia on the move, and I hope it continues to be on the move towards peace. Of course, you need multiple partners for that. But making all the efforts. Armenia also continuing to reform in terms of democracy and rule of law. All these things matter. And yeah, the EU assists where it can assist, with the monitoring mission, with this new initiative, because that's important also in the geopolitical context. If I can, Zbigniew, if I can pick on just what has been said by Marco,
please,
for example, Marco Juris. Yes, indeed, there is the makeover of the geopolitical order at the moment. We see that geography matters again. We see that it matters again to know who your friends are. We see that it matters to move closer together as countries that not only share interests, but also, as Kaja Kallas often says, principles and values. And in this context of the new world turmoil, of riding the storm, Trump, Xi Jinping, Putin, power plays, we see that things are happening indeed. We see EPC taking place here, with Canada present. That's significant. We see Britain moving closer to the EU, now also starting talks to participate in this new initiative to support Ukraine, the Ukraine loan of 90 billion. We see, if you look further to the northwest, we see Iceland, we often forget about that, but Iceland had EU accession negotiations, froze them in 2013, but this summer in August, they'll have a referendum on the question if they want to resume such kind of negotiations. Now, all these kind of things that are happening in a certain context, are happening indeed in the context of the makeover of the global order. And in this context, if I can pick on and build on what Mr. Fino said from Albania, we see this enlargement process. And this process is very technical in many of its aspects. I'm very much aware about that, and all the steps have to be taken. At the same time, the enlargement process always had also a geopolitical dimension. I remember that as a young diplomat in the Netherlands, we also concluded already decades ago that actually the EU's most effective foreign policy, you cannot lock it into the common foreign and security policy, the second pillar of the Maastricht Treaty. No, the enlargement is actually maybe the most effective foreign policy, because countries don't only align their policies, they adopt legislation from the EU and they transform their whole societies. Well, more effective than that you can't have. But, as Mr. De Rover said, we have to find the right balance, because it's not an automatic win-win. So you have to find the right balance, because we want to take in countries that make the EU as the EU together stronger rather than weaker. And we have had, of course, experience over the past decades that we've seen, notably in Hungary under Viktor Orban, where we saw that backsliding after accession, we saw regression in the independence of the judiciary, in the rule of law, in democratic processes, and it made the EU weaker rather than stronger, both internally as well as on the world scene. So it is very important that when we move together and that we take more countries in, that it makes the Union stronger together and more forceful. Last point, if I may, that also implies, I think, a task for the current EU member states and the Brussels bureaucracy, of which I will be part in the near future.
Kaspar, one brief question. There is, because we have limited time, we still have like 7 minutes around, and I want to use your wisdom about China. You know, we are joking sometimes that Putin helped to create Ukrainian national identity and President Trump European security identity. What is the contribution of China to the EU?
Well, the EU sees China in a kind of triple view, as well as a partner, for example, on climate change, where China is, of course, a huge CO2 emitter, but also part of the solution because of its scale and its technological ability. Where you also see China as a competitor, and nowadays we see that if you just look at the trade figures between the EU and China, to what extent it is a very vigorous competitor. And we also see from the EU China as a systemic rival, because it doesn't share all our values in several fields. And we have differences of interest and views and principles in many ways. So that will be a challenge. What you at least see at this moment in the current global context is that you see a very high number of delegations visiting China from the EU, from member states as well as the EU institutions. It's very impressive. So in the future, as the EU ambassador to China, I will have to manage all that, and that in itself will already be a very practical challenge.
Peter, if I could have a personal question, request to you, if you could convey in Beijing the name anti-coercion mechanism. Not everyone knows about it, but in the EU we have a mechanism, it's called anti-coercion mechanism. If someone aggressively attacks a single country of the EU, attacks the whole EU. It's like Article 5 on EU economy. So it's just a maybe polite reminder to our Chinese colleagues that if they will pick a small vulnerable state in the EU and will try to tease them, you will inform China that we have anti-coercion mechanism, so it means the whole EU is responding on behalf of this small vulnerable state. And this is something what we should be aware, not to allow Chinese to use this leverage of scale when we have it also. So just if I could...
There are, of course, a lot of different trade measures and possibilities. Instruments, so to say, anti-subsidy, anti-dumping, etc. And the measure, the ACI, the blocking statute, as it is often called, is a measure of last resort. But yes, the EU needs to look always at all the potential measures on the table. That is clear.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, I want to ask a question to the representative of our host, Arman. Well, I really admire the Armenian effort, and I know the time is essence, not only in our panel, but for Armenia, because many of regional challengers, enemies are busy right now. And it might not always be like that. So I admire your effort, but there is still, in my opinion, a risk. You are not in close relation with China and with Russia, which we can agree was kind of unhealthy relation. But right now you are in the middle, in transition. So in my opinion, it's a bit vulnerable. So based on the example of other countries that are trying to get closer to the European Union, to integrate with European Union, to join EU, is it Georgia? Is it Ukraine? Are these countries from Southeastern Europe? Are there some requests that you have to us? How we can help Armenia to be safe in this transitory period?
Thank you very much for the question and for this opportunity. Indeed, we have requests, and we have said it to our EU colleagues, starting from combating the hybrid warfare threats, malign information attacks, etc., ending with the trade policies. You know that Armenia is not in DCFTA agreement, in Deep and Comprehensive Free Trade Area agreement, which poses certain tariff barriers on Armenian goods, not to speak about non-tariff barriers. So we have communicated it to our EU colleagues that we could somehow either accelerate the process of lifting of some of the barriers, be that tariff barriers, non-tariff barriers, or maybe we could, for the time being, for, as you have phrased it, for this transition period, use some autonomous trade measures, which I know that EU institutions use very rarely and very reluctantly, that I understand. But answer to your question is this one, and I am not tired to repeat it, that the day will come and we would need very tangible and very fast, speedy solutions for some of our problems that we might encounter or might not. But better to have these measures at place at a political level, so that if we need them, like we had with, for example, today we have discussed the events of 2022 when the EU decided in the course of a couple of weeks, if not days, to send EU monitoring mission, civilian mission, to the border of Azerbaijan and Armenia, from the Armenian side of the border, and it helped us a lot. First it was the temporary mission, then it became a permanent mission, which is still in place, and it helped a lot. It was a cornerstone for a very long time of our security architecture, and this decision was made, as I said, in a very short time, which was not very common for other decisions made in the Council. So in the same manner, I hope, I believe that we could somehow convince our EU colleagues to take steps, some decisions that are not normally taken in a very short period of time. So this would be my answer.
I think this is very practical. So
measures,
more physical presence of EU observation missions, advisory missions on the ground in Armenia to counterbalance the regional tensions. Thank you very much for that. I think we don't have time. No one is kicking me, but I will try to maybe not sum up it, but well, when I've seen the motto of this year's Yerevan Dialogue conference, riding through the storms, well, I'm a sailor for 30 years, And I like storms. You know, I'm not afraid of them, but there are certain rules. And the basic rule is when you sail through the storm, don't stop. And this is the important element. Optimists would say, hopefully it will end. Pessimists will say that, oh, it is very scary. But realists just adjust the sails and keep going. We just have to keep going. But another reflection about the subject of our discussion about EU enlargement and being aware how difficult this process is, being from Poland, the country that had this path successfully ended. But it's about like a journey. It's not always about destination. It's not always about the end. It's the process itself is of great value. And I think the effort that Armenia, that Albania, that Serbia are doing on the way to the European Union is of incredible value itself. And I think this is something to admire. And I hope that our public will join us in applauding this wonderful panel. Thank you very much for your contribution. Thank you. Get back to the MC and have a great day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much.